Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to the 46th Right and Left Discussion Forum. Before we begin our discussion this morning, I'd like to announce that our website went live in mid-December. So please visit us at www.civilitymatters. That's civilitymatters.org. And I would hope that you would visit a number of the pages, particularly the Town Crier, where you'll see several articles that I hope you'll find interesting. And also, please do visit the Donate page. That's an important part of our activity. Help us continue to spread the word about political civility. The purpose of our discussion is to demonstrate that it is possible to have civil discussions about contentious topics while expanding everyone's knowledge and understanding through thoughtful consideration of diverse opinions. Our topic today is media narratives, or more specifically about media narratives that are formed in the early stages of reporting on events and resisting or slow to change as more accurate information develops. Our panel today, beginning on my left, is Patty Haskins, retired math teacher and current member of the Wadsworth City Council. On her left is Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services and first gentleman of the City of Wadsworth. On his left is Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior electrochemist. And on his left is Dr. Natalie Sydorenko, educator, writer in the field of communications. Patty.
Yes.
In the past few months, there have been a number of events covered in the national news that have been slow to develop. As information came out, with clarifying information was very slow to come out. But it seems that in the initial narrative that have been presented by the various news outlets, they tend to resist changing to conform to new facts. It's been said that some of the news media tend to sacrifice accuracy for simplicity. Do you agree with that?
Yes and no.
Oh, thank you.
First of all, I think one of the things that we as a culture right now have as a problem is our need for immediate answers. When an event occurs, tragic event, good event, we want to know immediately what's going on. So there is pressure placed upon news agencies to come out with who did it, why they did it, and how they did it before they have facts brought in. We tend to criticize those who go on air and say, we're going to wait until we have all the details before we report something that is not correct. We all saw what happened with Susan Rice when she went on the news right after the Benghazi incident and said what they thought might be a problem at that time and was then chastised afterwards because of saying that. I also find that one of the problems we have is that we have a 24-hour news cycle now, which they have to fill space. So they grasp on to these different topics and different events and then have to fill 24 hours with info. And unfortunately, in some cases, fill it with or take the event and try to tailor it to meet the ideology of that particular station. For example,
I knew that you were going to have an example.
And this was interesting because it was one that I just saw this morning. And I was a little shocked.
You were actually
with it.
watching Fox News this morning?
I watched Fox News just about every morning.
Do you
so,
really?
Oh, yes, I do.
Brian, did you know that?
No comment.
And they were talking about the tragic event in Paris yesterday, where the members of the Charlie Hebdo staff, 12 of them, I believe, were killed in an act of terrorism, Islamic terrorism, that occurred. And they were reporting on this, and this is a tragic event. Half of the time was spent discussing who the terrorists were, why they might have attacked, and what the repercussions were, what they were doing to try to catch them. The other half of the time was spent blaming President Obama because yesterday in one of the conferences he referred to this act as senseless violence. And I thought, you know, that's interesting. This is, and they will continue to do that. Now, he did, of course, refer to it as terrorism, but because he did not use the exact terminology that they wanted, they were spinning this to make another, instead of saying, these are the people at fault, they were, and some of the, Charles Krautheimer was on, there were another number of others that spoke, John Bolton in particular, was blaming the president because he said, because he didn't call it Islamic terrorism, it's making us look soft, and that's why these people were attacked in Paris. I mean, this is a stretch.
Yeah.
And they will not change that because that does not meet the ideology of that station because they want to present that picture. When we had the Ferguson case broke, the media coverage was rampant. And I think that what that and that's on both sides, and what it tended to do was sensationalize the entire episode so that people were watching, and I think it brought out those that were opposed to this as being a racist attack. Before they knew the facts, before they knew exactly what had happened, people were out demonstrating because it was being presented on some networks as that.
As a racist attack.
As a racist attack. On the other hand, there were also those stations that were hyping up the amount of protest that was going on. I still remember watching one evening, and there is a reporter standing in an empty street with no one around him, saying, it's pretty calm right now. And then the announcer kept saying, but how many are there protesting? You've got, and then he gets done speaking, saying no one's out here protesting. He gets off and he said, thousands are in the streets protesting, and then kept showing pictures from before, which tends to sensationalize it. When Gabby Gifford was shot, the first reaction to that was that it was a Tea Party member that had shot her. So before the facts were there, before anyone knew what happened, that assumption was made, and it took, I think, 2 to 3 days before they came out and said, no, this was not a member of the Tea Party. Again, it's jumping to the fact that people want to know right now. It's using the ideology of that station or of that news media and then trying to generalize the facts to meet what they want. That's where I have problems.
Okay, Bryan, what do they say on MSNBC?
Al Sharpton.
Don't you watch that every morning?
I agree with Patty on most of her points. We have a tendency, because of the issues that she's talked about, we try to fit the news to the narrative. And because of that, like you said, accuracy suffers. When we massage, or even in some instances create stories, like we just saw with the Rolling Stone article
I was going to mention that one, yes, exactly. University of Virginia.
Total fabrication. It got legs. Next thing you know, there's people protesting down there, and they're calling special meetings because of this perceived issue that is supposed to take place on their campus with rape and all that stuff. And we have a time-honored, almost sacred principle in the law, and that is you are innocent until proven guilty. And that gets thrown out the window when we start to manufacture and massage the news to fit our particular narrative. The White House has been a big proponent of narratives. The Benghazi situation, their narrative has been that the war on terror has been over, and that anything that would sort of counter that is not really a terrorist activity. We had the Fort Hood shooting. That's not an act of terrorism.
Workplace violence.
That was workplace violence. You have the situation, on the other side with Ferguson. That police officer was tried in the press. He was guilty, no matter what anybody said, and the people took to the streets. And I agree, the media inflamed that. I watch CNN, I watch MSNBC, I watch Fox, and that whole thing. And it was atrocious, the type of reporting that was going on. And to even, put in public the officer's address. I mean, where does that stop? When do we say, wait a second, the press has just as much obligation to want the facts and to get to the facts. No one wants to limit the press. I mean, I want a free and open press, exactly.
Yeah, and
but I
that's
want
not
it
there
accurate,
anymore.
and if it's not, then it just hurts. It hurts the whole process going forward. Who do you believe anymore? So I think we really need to step back and let the press report the news accurately. We've got to get the opinions out of it at times. If you're going to be an editor and you're going to have an editorial page, that's where you put it. But you don't have it, in all the different articles and leading people to believe what it is just to fit your cause at the time.
Yeah. Ron, at this point, I just have to ask you a question. Patty indicated that she thought that the public demanded quick answers. Do you think it's that, or is it more that the news networks are anxious to compete with each other to be first with the story?
Well, there's some of that. I'm not sure why I'm here this morning. I agree with both my conservative and my and my progressive friends here. Yes, I think there's that, and I've been trying to think about this as what's happening. What's the reason for this? And I happened to be watching Frontline last night. There was an article. There was a program on the gun control issue. And I was about to go to bed. I was tired. My wife says, your activist wife is going to watch this. So I of course, got sucked into it. But a couple of things came out of that. And I think that's applicable here. They pointed to the incident after the shooting in Columbine and said, well, we got to do something. Immediately, gun sales skyrocketed and have been going up ever since. Yeah. That fear is one of the great motivators of people. That's one thing. The second thing is that the networks and the newspapers, they have to sell space, they have to sell time. What better way to do that than preying on people's fears? And I think that's part of it.
Fear and conflict.
Fear and conflict. I think that's part of it, whether it's there or not. The first Asian airline, Malaysian airline that disappeared, terrorists, terrorists, terrorists. Well, who knows what happened?
Yeah.
Quite possibly, but who knows? They haven't found the airplane yet. Who knows?
And it gave 24-hour coverage to everybody.
24-hour coverage. And you listen to that sort of thing, and it's the same thing, the same thing, the same thing,
I
the
think
same
they're still
pictures.
reporting on it.
No facts.
Yeah.
No facts.
So there is that, and one of the most interesting, compelling things, just back to the gun control issue, that one of the narrators at the very end that says the NRA and Gun Owners of America not doing anything illegal, they're just using democracy in a very efficient way. Getting their constituents hyped up to go vote and to go take action that us gun control advocates have not been able to match. So yeah, I think there is some of that. The media we want answers right away. We've got our prejudices. The news people, the news medias have their prejudices, points of view. But, so we play on those. We use those to color the whatever facts there might be, and to fill in the facts when we don't have them.
Yeah. Natalie, now it's your turn.
Well, excuse me. I think there are several issues at play here. A few we have not mentioned yet. I'd like to say that as a progressive, like Patty, and maybe the most extreme progressive on the panel, I can't watch any news. I'm just as appalled by MSNBC as I am by Fox, because I don't believe that news is happening. I think it's just opinion nowadays. I don't see the rugged journalist out on the street trying to get the facts, remaining neutral without his or her opinion being asserted and saying, this is what I've seen, this is what I've heard, this is the testimony that we're getting. One of the things I have always told my students in rhetoric is that rhetoric is not the art of BS that people like to say. Rhetoric is about gathering evidence and making a solid, rational argument. You need to know both sides of the issue in order to make a rational argument. I feel that today's journalism fails to do that, and I feel that that happens for three reasons. One, although I do think the gatekeepers of media are still driven by politics, I think more so they're driven by money, and they want to compete with each other. And they'll kind of tweak their politics however they need to, as long as the almighty dollar is behind it. I think the people they hire that are the agenda setters are afraid to break from the norm. What I mean by that is, let's say Fox News has a story on Benghazi, and MSNBC says, well, there's nothing really new to report right now. Maybe we could cover this small local business who actually is acting like true capitalism and helping their community, and they've employed so many people, and they have grassroots movements going on. They're not going to go to that story because there's no wow factor to it. Which leads me to my third point, which is entertainment. The news media is now entertainment. If you can turn on CNN and in the same 15 minutes hear a story about Kim Kardashian's magazine covers right next to a missing airplane where 172 people are likely dead, that's appalling to me. And that's all about ratings, and that's all about entertainment. So I feel that the gatekeepers are driving these stories and not moving on to other stories based on money, based on competitions with other news stations, but also based on, we want to be entertained. We want to see the fight between Fox News and MSNBC. And it's not surprising that not just my college students, but the majority of young people, when they claim they get their news from Jon Stewart or Stephen Colbert, right, The Daily Show or The Colbert Report, they aren't kidding. And here's why: because those people are equal opportunity offenders. And what I mean by that is they are fact-checking everything so they can shred everyone on their mistakes. The left, the right, and everyone in between. And young people respect that because they're like, wow, these writers really looked to find the evidence that Natalie's asking us to gather, and they're reporting it, albeit in a satirical format. But often that has more facts in that format than you're going to find in a 30-minute MSNBC show, 30-minute Fox News show, and that's on the media, and that's tragic, and they should be held accountable for correcting that. I agree with you that we should also be held accountable for demanding it, but they really need to be accountable to bring true journalism back.
They've actually run studies on that, and this a few years back I saw a study that more people got their news from The Daily Show
Absolutely.
than from any of
On both sides of the aisle, Patty, on both sides of the aisle.
Exactly,
Right?
which was extremely interesting. You know, and in response to what you said, these people that are on the 24-hour news stations are not journalists.
Correct.
They'd like to call them. I mean, Al Sharpton is not a journalist, let's face it.
They're entertainers.
They're entertainers, exactly. You know, the journalists...
He's not funny.
No, he's not. No.
No, they don't have to be funny.
But yeah, some of the things that have come out about him recently are interesting. But you know, the journalists ask who, what, where, when, how, and they're not doing that. They are reporting opinion, like we are giving opinion right here. But
Let me ask you this. Anybody can weigh in on this. Sometimes it's not so much what they're reporting as what they don't report.
That's
and
true,
that,
yeah.
particularly if an event happens that's counter to the narrative. And I'm thinking particularly about during the Ferguson and the Eric Gardner in New York, that during that time, the narrative was white cops are looking for any reason they can to shoot or take down a black guy. That was the narrative. And then we have a black guy that walks into a bar in Akron, Ohio and shoots a cop and 4 other people. And in that same week, a black youth gets shot on Copley Road by a black cop. But that doesn't fit the narrative.
Crickets.
So it never made it to the,
Crickets.
Pardon me?
Crickets. You don't hear anything.
right.
The silence is deafening on those things. I feel like we're all together. We could have a kumbaya moment
Yeah,
here.
absolutely.
I just think, you know, at times when you turn on these channels, whether it's MSNBC or Fox News, it is just really sensationalism. And you tend to, you know, I'll admit that I listen to NPR because at least...
It's not a confession.
Well, I'm trying to come clean in 2015. And because you know, you have a variety of opinion, and
Yes.
you know, just what happened in Paris, that is scary enough that anyone would take out their anger on a news organization. I think that's what has angered the people in France.
Absolutely.
You know, they believe they're a secular society. They believe in that satirical, you know, you have a right, you know, it is your right to lampoon anybody, whether it's a pope or their prime minister, you know, Islam, you name it. And to go after those people like they did, and that's troubling.
And they're publishing next week, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Which is
Good
good
for
to
them.
know.
Oh, yeah.
It's good to know that
Yeah.
we're going to
Yeah.
continue this.
And we have seen in America, we haven't seen that type of violence against the media here on our soil, but we have seen journalists disappear if they report what doesn't fit the agenda. Not disappear by death, but disappear, you lose your job.
Yeah.
So I think that as much as we want to believe that we have a lot of journalistic freedom and integrity, how much do we really have? If you are a person who is going to break with your station, I do remember, and I'm not going to remember the gentleman's name, Shepard Smith. He's a Fox News correspondent, or was, I'm not sure if he still is, but I remember he broke with the narrative on Fox News one day when he was really upset and said, these facts are not correct, and here's how I know why. And I was really proud of him. And I've seen people on progressive stations break too and say, I'm not going to throw this person under the bus just because they're not my political affiliation, because you're wrong. Your facts are wrong. But those people's careers then are short-lived at the station that they're at.
Actually,
And that's unfair to them.
Shepard Smith is now one of the stars at Fox. He's got the afternoon program.
Okay.
And
Lon Williams came to Fox, though, because of that, wasn't he?
he was fired.
Yeah.
He
He was
was
at
fired by
NPR.
NPR for having an opinion. Yeah. But the Shepard Smith got my attention first when he came out, being a Fox News on-air personality, ranting against the Bush administration for torturing. I mean, in fact, he slipped in the F-bomb on the air. He was so agitated by the fact that this country would actually torture people. He has not been fired. In fact, he is a star. But in any event, I want to get back to one of Patty's points, that some of this sticking to a narrative in spite of the facts that develop actually causes huge problems. To what extent do you think news reporting was responsible for the big-time riots, not only in Ferguson, Missouri, but across the country, the demonstrations and riots? Riots in Oakland and Ferguson, most of the places the riots were peaceful. But you blame that on the media?
I'll say one thing and then I'll step back and let everyone answer. Because I have to study speeches and news and what the framing of the debate is in any given situation as an occupation, I use a lot of alternative media. Like when you said you listen to NPR, so I'll read commondreams.org, I'll go on Christian Science Monitor, the BBC, Alternet, news that isn't the mainstream that we're used to here 24 cycle. What was interesting to me is that all of the non-mainstream news was talking about race relations and how far we're setting ourselves back and the sadness of it and trying to interview families. The mainstream news was all saying, we're ready for it to happen. Everyone's waited for bated breath for this verdict to come down, which they waited to be at nighttime, which is a higher level of violence likely. The news media of the mainstream media completely anticipated and already narrativized and reported as if the riots had happened prior to their occurrence, almost fating it to be that way. Even if it wouldn't have, and we had a pretty good idea that it probably would, but they were reporting as if it's already a done deal. And wow, not only were we right, but it's even worse than we thought. Look at all the fire, look at all the violence.
Yeah.
That was mainstream media, that was not alternative media. And I'm very disappointed in them that they did that, because I feel that they fueled that fire on both sides. There were white police officers and black citizens who wanted to work together and were working together.
And locally they were.
And locally for sure,
Locally
and that
they were.
was not being reported.
Yeah.
The same footage of violence was being scrolled over and over and
Well,
over.
you know, you look at that, the incident in New York recently with the two officers being killed, and the person who killed them is obviously, I think he they did say he did have some mental
Well,
instability.
anyone has to be mentally deranged to kill
do that.
somebody.
But
okay?
he's in, what, Baltimore?
Yeah.
And he's watching the news, and he's seeing this, and I have to believe...
And he heard the mayor.
And he heard that... I don't know that the mayor had as much to do with it as the news cycle did.
The mayor stood there and said, "I've warned my son, who is biracial, to be cautious around white policemen."
But there was an extension of that is always cut off, and that's
that
when,
right?
Yeah, oh yes.
So that's all. Okay.
Yeah.
I got the narrative part.
One thing she brought up about the BBC, I get that on my radio in the car, and I'll tell you, those reporters, they take it to people. You don't hear that here, because news organizations bring in people that want to further that narrative.
You're right.
Exactly.
They don't want to discuss
And they
it.
have a script ahead of
And
time.
they know
Yeah.
what that person's going to say. You know exactly the lieutenant colonel that they're going to bring in, or the spokesperson for the NAACP is just going to fortify that narrative. You listen to the BBC, and those reporters, they take it to you, whether you're conservative, whether you're a liberal or progressive. They have hard questions, and that's not what's happening now. No one's willing to ask the hard question because we're afraid that somehow we're going to offend somebody, in that process.
But the Brits don't feel that way.
No. A good friend of mine was an investigative reporter for the Akron Beacon Journal, and he's since moved on. But one of the hardest things that he thought was to ask the right questions at the right time and to be almost dogged in his pursuit of that story. Sure. And sometimes, it didn't fit his politics, but he wasn't a political type of person. He was out there to try to get the facts, get the story right, and to present the story.
And that's important that you said that. He wasn't a political type of person. Journalists are allowed to have an opinion in their private life, at Thanksgiving dinner, with their friends. But if you are really trying to be an investigative reporter, your job is to remain neutral and objective, not to shape the story based on what you want as an outcome.
Well, I want to thank you all for a very good discussion. The time went very quickly. I'd like to close with this quote from John F. Kennedy. "The greatest enemy of truth is not the lie, deliberate, contrived, dishonest, but the myth, persistent, persuasive, and unrealistic. Belief in myths allows us the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought." Thank you, John.